All right, and we are back with our first conversation for this morning, and we are joined by an individual that really needs no introduction, but for the sake of the show and protocol, we will introduce him, none other than the Minister of Home Affairs and New Growth Industries, the Honorable Kareem Musa. Good morning, Mr. Musa.
Good morning, Paul, and good morning, Sabrina, and thank you for having me on today.
Yes, it's good to have you on. I think that there's a number of things that we'd like to discuss with you. And one of the main topics we'll begin with, Sab, is the gun control, firearm and ammunition control. It's been one of those buzzing topics. If you would, given several reports on the media from a number of individuals about how the receiving and handing out of gun license and ammunition license has been taking place. And I know that Cabinet only recently approved the establishment of a firearm and ammunition control board.
Yes.
Correct? So let's talk about the decision for that and why Cabinet saw it fit for such a board to be approved and established.
Yes, thank you very much, Paul. The issue of gun control in the country is something that our ministry has been focusing on, I would say, for the last 15 months or so. And we're not just talking about legal firearms, which this particular amendment to the Firearms Act deals with the issuance of a legal firearm. We also have a comprehensive review of the Firearms Act that will tackle the illegal firearms, which at the end of the day really is the pressing issue that has been causing a lot of the issues for Belize over the last 20 years or so. The influx of illegal firearms into our country has increased exponentially, I would say, in the last decade. And you see a lot of the crimes that are being committed in the country are because of these illegal firearms, not necessarily the legal firearms. And so while it is that we're working on this comprehensive review of the Firearms Act, over the last few months, the issue of legal firearms has come under heavy scrutiny. And so what we have done, while we will start the consultations on the amendments to the Firearms Act to address illegal firearms, we saw it fit at this time to move up in advance the issue of the Firearms and Ammunition Control Board, which is something that we've been working on for quite some time, which would offer greater scrutiny, which would offer greater oversight in terms of the issuance of firearms. And as you have heard the Compol himself say, he's extremely busy. He's an extremely busy man dealing with the day-to-day affairs of crime across the country, of citizen security throughout our country, that to have to address reviewing applications, that's not something that he should be doing. He has more pressing issues to deal with. And so we found it necessary to move that up and to create a system similar to what exists in Jamaica of a board. And that board will now be comprised of a magistrate on a rotational basis, of a police officer who is the head of dangerous goods within the police department, and of our CEO at the ministry, whoever that CEO may be at any given time. So currently it's Mr. Arthurs. In the future it might be a different CEO. And so this will be the composition of this board that will now accept, review gun applications and determine whether or not they should be issued. The person who is sitting on the board in the form of the head of dangerous goods as a police officer, he is the individual who will liaise with Special Branch on all the vetting that is done. As you know, one of the primary issues coming out of this investigative piece that I think Channel 7 did is the fact that there was some fraudulent vetting that was coming out. Now, Special Branch is denying any involvement in providing that fraudulent vetting. And so the head of dangerous goods, that's going to be one of his responsibilities to ensure what we are getting out of Special Branch is legitimate. And so there are all these checks and balances that we're putting in place. And in addition to this board, we are also putting in place a requirement, because I have no idea how it has never been done, but how is it that I can give you a firearm, Paul, without you getting any training whatsoever in the use of a firearm? And so we have identified that as a crucial void in the current legislation. And so one of the requirements moving forward is that you will have to pass a certification course before it is that you are issued with your licensed firearm. And finally, one of the amendments that we have agreed upon at the cabinet level is digitizing the gun license. And so, as you know, it's still done manually, a very archaic process. We have to look at the record keeping and all of that. And so we find that it's going to create a lot of check and balance, especially at the gun stores. If you take your ID card and you swipe for the purchase of ammunition, it is recorded. And so this board, this new board, will be able to check the inventory that a gun store claims it has in terms of firearms and ammunition and cross-check it with the purchases that are happening. And so all of this, of course, very progressive moves that are being made at the cabinet level. And it is now going to require the Attorney General to incorporate these new amendments into the legislation.
Minister, let's take a step back for a bit and talk or consider the number of gun and ammunition license that were distributed perhaps illegally under the former system. One would want to imagine that because of the serious revelation and even allegations over the last few weeks, that we've only scratched the surface of how many gun license, how many of these licenses have been distributed illegally. So one would perhaps there may be a request for some sort of investigation before we move forward, or even in moving forward, to seriously and conclusively establish how many licenses are out there and are being held by individuals that truly do not qualify to hold these licenses, whether it be known criminals, someone with a psychological or mental health issue that really shouldn't have a license, etc. Are there considerations to that end to sort of unravel or discover so that some of these licenses can be revoked?
Yes, absolutely. Moving forward, Paul, that's a critical point that has to be addressed. This board that is going to be implemented, they will also have the powers to order audits into the not just the current situation, but even the past. And so that is something, as you have seen over the last few months. I think there were two instances, one that was pressed by the former administration, the former minister, pressing for a particular individual, for whatever reason, we won't speculate, to get a license. Thankfully, that license has been revoked because the individual has proven to be not an upstanding individual, to be deserving of a gun license. Thankfully, that has been revoked by this Commissioner of Police. And there's also another individual whose vetting came back and we determined that it was fraudulent. Within 1 month, the commissioner was able to identify that was fraudulent vetting even before this person became famous, because afterwards the person then became very famous in the media and that sort of thing. But the commissioner, within 1 month of recognizing that vetting was fraudulent, revoked the license. And so that type of audit has to be carried out, certainly. We are hoping that the Auditor General's office, we know that they're very pressed for resources, and they are very selective in terms of prioritizing which departments, which ministry is to be audited in any given year. We find that this issue is so pressing that we believe it will be one that will be audited by the Auditor General's department, and certainly that will give us a clean slate once it is that they undertake this audit of the issuance of gun licenses, I would say over the past maybe 5 to 10 years.
So you would agree that based on what's out there, that in fact there are individuals out there that are not qualified to have gun license and they do?
I can't definitively say that because the two instances that we know of, the commissioner revoked those licenses even before this became an issue. Now, it's not as though this became a hot button issue and then the commissioner revoked these licenses. He was very proactive even before this became an issue to revoke those licenses. And so I have every trust in the commissioner's ability to determine when in fact a license was issued and improperly so, and to have revoked it. And so if there are other instances that come out after this, I'm sure that the same will be done by this new board coming in. And so it all depends on this audit, and if not the audit, then other information that comes to the attention of the board that warrants the revocation of a license. But I can't definitively say that there are other fraudulent vetting out there.
And I ask because one would want to deduce that it would take more than just 2 instances for the entire system to be changed, for the entire system to be what's reformed, that it would take more than just 2 instances. So one would want to imagine that there are many cases out there and that it is so alarming that there is a need for a new system to be put in place, such as a board.
Not necessarily, Paul. As I mentioned in my opening, the commissioner has a lot more responsibility than just dealing with these firearm applications, and this is something that we have been working on, like I said, for the past 15 months to relieve the compol of this duty. And so this was going to be done in any event. But in addition to that, there are allegations out there, and I think this is what made it more pressing, that there are individuals at gun stores that are actually offering licenses for sale.
Really?
To me, that is the issue of concern that we think needs to be addressed. And so the commissioner now can take up other duties like investigating these gun store dealers who are the ones purporting to sell these licenses.
Now,
so that has to come under heavy scrutiny.
Now, Minister, aside from perhaps gun store owners that are issuing gun licenses, there's also...
They don't issue gun licenses. They issue the guns. But the allegations that are out there are that they have a backdoor in to help you to get your license. Yes.
Well, aside from that, there's also conversations about police officers that are doing the same thing. Is there an investigation underway, or are you guys planning to do that in investigating who these officers are and stopping what was done?
Absolutely. This is not just something that's going to be limited to any allegation that comes up about a particular gun store. If it is that there are allegations out there about specific officers, now that would require individuals to be brave enough to come forward and say, I will give you a statement to the Professional Standards Branch or to the police department, to give a statement to say, on such and such a date, this person offered to sell me a gun license, this police officer. That's what it will require, unfortunately, because you can't just go on speculation. A lot of people like to gossip. There are a lot of rumors out there, and we can't be charging people based on that. But an investigation starts once it is that an allegation of a specific nature has occurred by a specific officer.
Has any allegations been put forward so far?
Not to date, no.
It's clear, Minister, based on what you're saying and based on what we've heard, that this gun license it's a huge hustle because of the money involved. You're talking monies for gun dealers by way of if you have your gun license, then clearly you could buy the firearm. We'll be able to sell you the firearm, and by police officers because of the on-the-table dealings that they could receive. How confident are you that a board, the establishment of a board, could put an end to these types of behind the curtain, under the table sort of deals? Commissioner himself says he's not too confident, and he's on record saying that he won't say it will work or it won't work, but he's alluding to a position that perhaps he's not too confident that this board will stop these types of things from happening, from gun license getting into the hands of the unqualified. In fact, he referred to the same Jamaica that you're referring to, saying that since that board has been established, there's still a license getting into the hands of criminals, in fact.
I don't believe that is what the commissioner said. I think that he was saying in terms of the reduction of crime. Now, one thing has nothing to do with the next. The creation of the board, like I said, we have two things at play here, illegal firearms and legal firearms. What the commissioner has said is that it has not resulted in any reduction in crime in Jamaica. He has also said that individuals sit on board, human beings sit on board, and human beings are fallible. And so it's very possible that also something could be missed. So this board possibly could have missed a fraudulent vetting. It could have gotten to them and they could have missed it. But that's the whole point, that we have a board in place that will offer a check and balance. It's not just one individual anymore determining, okay, you will get a license today, Paul. Considering what the commissioner has to go through on a daily basis, not just dealing with the media, dealing with each and every crime, because he's a very hands-on commissioner. And when he goes to his office, it's probably just to sign things. Whereas you have a board that will consider things now. And it's 3 individuals sitting on the board and sitting there on a rotational basis who can be changed, as opposed to having a law in place that says this commissioner, forever as he's the commissioner, will decide gun licenses. He's totally immovable at that point. Whereas if there are any allegations against any member of the board, they can be moved. That doesn't currently exist. And to me, that is the difference. Offering a check and balance system by 3 individuals who will have more time to dedicate themselves to it, and then these individuals can be changed, can be moved.
Sir, we've heard instances or reports of, well, first of all, let me just say that I know that for a lot of individuals, having a firearm and a licensed firearm on them makes them feel powerful. Makes a lot of people feel as if they're untouchable. And I would imagine that's the wrong mindset to have when you have a licensed firearm on you. But we've heard instances of where those who believe they're highly connected or politically connected, going out in the public, brandishing their firearm, threatening people, even allegations of threat against individuals, using their firearms. And I know that in a few cases, license have been revoked, but we've also heard of cases where the individuals keep their firearm license and they go on with life as if none of that had happened. Let's talk a bit about political interference in this process and the protection that some of these individuals may have when they go out there and they do foolishness with the gun and the licensed firearm.
The Commissioner of Police, in my opinion, Paul, has been very above board, very transparent in that process. I think in all instances, and you would have to pinpoint me to the instances where an individual did something like brandish their firearm, shoot at somebody, and they were not charged, that sort of thing, for me to actually agree with you, because I do not agree with you. I believe in all instances where individuals have done such things, their licenses have been revoked. One particular instance comes to mind, and that individual's license was revoked. And so you would have to pinpoint me to a scenario to say this is a politically connected person who did something. I know it happened under the last administration. I can only speak over the last 2.5 years. I have not seen an instance of that.
Okay.
Now, Minister, I want to switch the conversation into the acquiring of illegal firearms into the country, where we see a lot of these gang activities take place, obviously, with these very same firearms. Let's touch on how you believe these firearms come into the country in the first place.
Well, as you know, we have a very thriving illegal cannabis trade in this country. It has been one of the points that I have been harping on over the last 2.5 years as one of the reasons why we need to create regulations, to put regulations in place to govern the cannabis industry, because it exists. Let us not hide from that. I think a lot of the times it's so taboo that we don't want to speak of it.
Sure.
But we are a cannabis consuming country. And every time a shipment of cannabis comes in from Mexico, because that is where the cannabis is coming in from, the cartels in Mexico are providing guns to individuals on the streets of Belize, and in particular Belize City. And we're not talking 1 or 2 guns. Every single year, the police department recovers over 100 guns off the streets. That's a lot of guns. But those are only the guns that the police are able to recover. Imagine how many hundreds more are out there being hidden by these criminals. And so we always have to have these operations in place. And you might ask, but why do they need to have guns if they're selling cannabis? The simple reason is that many times these dealers, so to speak, in the streets, owe the big man. And when they owe the big man has to send another group to deal with that group that owes. That's just as simple as it gets. And thereafter, it results in a series of retaliation and a series of beef that continues for decades. That's what we have seen build up over the last few decades. And it all revolves a plant. Could you imagine that? It's not as though we are a cocaine producing or a cocaine consuming country. It all revolves around the cannabis trade, the illegal cannabis trade. And I always say, do you see anyone, Paul, killing anybody for a bottle of rum, for the sale of a bottle of rum? No, because rum is regulated, beer is regulated. Both of those substances are more harmful than cannabis, but yet we continue to live in the dark. It is this 100-year propaganda which has fostered this environment now to create this illegal trade that results in guns coming over and gangs being created around this particular plant.
Now, we've seen where how cocaine comes into the country, the plane landings and all of that. How exactly does cannabis come into the country?
It comes through our borders, very porous borders. And so whether it is through Guatemala or through Mexico, I know that there are instances of it coming all the way from the United States in big barrels. It's not just these dime bags with the top. Big barrels coming from the U.S. Sometimes it gets past the Customs Department, but I know that there has been a serious crackdown at the Customs Department. A lot of busts have been taking place, and I think that shipment route has been cut off, at least temporarily, because there have been a lot of busts at our port of Belize. But every day, on a daily basis, it comes in from Mexico through our very porous borders.
And there, I would imagine there's also active operations on the ground within the streets of Belize City and other neighborhoods to crack down on the sale and distribution, and even to bust. Is it the same that every single day we're seeing busts through the streets of Belize City?
Like I said just last week, and it's not reported in the media, but I receive reports every time a firearm is confiscated off the streets. Last week we had 4, and that's just in 1 week. And so every single day there are operations that are undertaken. But if you bust one, you could best believe that there are 5 more that are going to come in. Once this trade continues, it will always continue.
So you believe that with providing regulation on the cannabis use, that would quell the illegal firearms as well?
I think eventually it will. It won't happen the day you regulate. The industry will take a time to pick up, to become legal. Everything will take a while to level off. I think within 5 years you will see a drastic reduction in murders happening because of cannabis, yes.
Really?
Yes.
No, I am led to assume that when you you would think that when you see incidents such as the murder of the young lady and the injury of her child recently, the latest murder of a 16-year-old young man, and the ones we've been seeing of recently, that they're all connected to this drug trade?
I think in that particular case, no. So I would say 80% of all murders in Belize City, not countrywide, because most of the countrywide murders, a lot of them are domestic issues. But in terms of the murders happening in Belize City, 80% of them are related, starting from cannabis, but eventually building up a divide of my turf hates your turf for whatever reason, and we will eliminate each other. That is just how retaliation works. You kill my dad, I will kill your dad, and that goes on and on. But in terms of that particular case, that is an internal feud within a gang. Within the George Street gang, there is an internal feud, and that individual that carried out that execution, because that is what it was very indiscriminate, was very reckless, and was very cowardice in just going and shooting up a house that has a grandmother, I am told, lives in there, children live in there, and of course this mother lived in there. And so that is a very cowardice thing to have done, a very indiscriminate thing to be shooting up a house. But again, that stems from an internal feud, which many times is very difficult to contain and to curtail, because these are individuals who live right across from each other. And so, yes, we have beefed up our presence in that area. The police department has beefed up their presence in that area, but it's a very, very small area to contain. And so we will have to constantly be there, but this is something that's likely going to have retaliation. And so the police department and the GI3 in particular is picking up those individuals who, based on intelligence that it has gathered, are involved in this internal beef, and will pursue gang charges against these individuals, because we have to take them off the streets. We cannot allow individuals like this to continue to roam the streets when in fact they're living in such close quarters and carrying out these wanton and indiscriminate acts of violence.
How do these individuals evade the police in these instances?
That was at 4 a.m., Paul. The police cannot be at every single street corner at every given time of day. So imagine that. They wait for the police patrol to pass and they just carry out their act. And so, like I said, it's very difficult. It's much easier to contain a cross-gang rivalry. That's much easier because you have to traverse across different areas to get to a particular area to carry out your violent act. But imagine living a few houses away, carrying out this act, and then going to hide. It's very easy if it is that you have made sure that the coast is clear, you can then carry out your act. And so it's very important at this point, not just for us to have the police presence, but for us to root out these individuals from the community.
Minister, I want to move on to another topic, and I know we could spend some time on that second conversation there. But I'd like to get your thoughts on the redistricting process that's currently taking place. I understand that the proposal will be brought before the House at the next sitting, which I would imagine should be before the end of the month, hopefully. But the leader of the opposition, he made some very interesting allegations, particularly raising your name, to say that one of the...
Are you surprised, Paul?
I am not, sir. If it's not against you as a minister, it's against you as an area rep.
Everything.
It's love and hate in one,
yeah,
sir.
Yeah. I think it's more love.
It's more love.
Yeah.
He's said that you're afraid or you don't want to lose your seat, and as a result, you pushed back against the amalgamation of your constituency into another constituency as a proposal made by the opposition to kind of balance, to kind of come to that balance that the exercise is to bring. Your thoughts on how the process is going, or the proposal that has been made, and the statements of the opposition leader.
Classic case, Paul, of the leader of the opposition's continued fascination with me. I don't know what that is. I'll have to get to the bottom of that. But let me just say this. No politician, including me, no politician should have any involvement in that elections and boundaries proposal, in the creation of that elections and boundaries proposal. That has representatives, not ministers, not politicians, sitting on it from both political parties. And it has the Chief Elections of Boundaries Commissioner. That proposal then goes to the National Assembly after they have formulated it. Now, they came up with that plan on their own. And from what I gather at last week's cabinet, I was out of the country at a conference in Trinidad, but from what I gather from the cabinet meeting is that even that proposal has raised many concerns. In particular, there is a situation where you have a 25% deviation from the average, meaning that we are not going to accomplish our objective of making each and every division have an average of, say, 5,500 voters. We still have one division, as I understand it, I haven't seen the proposal yet, that has 8,000 voters, and other divisions that have 4,000. And so that is a huge gap still. And the whole point of redistricting is to ensure that each and every division has the same, if not the same, close to the same amount of voters. Now, in terms of the leader of the opposition's allegation that I am somehow fearful of losing my seat, man, I don't know where these politicians come up with these things. And I have to chalk it up to the fact that many of them have no life outside of politics. I am an attorney at law. I studied 5 years to get my degree to practice law. I have a life outside of politics. And so I do not depend on politics the way Boots Martinez does, the way probably Shine does, because I don't know what his profession is. And so these individuals need to be in power. They need to be at all times in politics. That's not me. But let me just say this. If for whatever reason the proposal were to come back and they say, well, Caribbean Shores has to join up with Keycaulker or has to join up with Fort George or Pickstock, I have no problem with that. I will most certainly challenge for my seat because my people will demand of me. And so you can call it whatever you like. You can call it Fort George, you can call it Pickstock, you can call it Keycaulker, Belize Rural South. If Caribbean Shores moves in that direction and it's called something else, I will continue to contest because the people will demand that I represent them. You can call it what you want. And so there's no fear on my part, and I'm sure a lot of the individuals in our party, there's no fear of this redistricting exercise. It is just that the way this proposal has come back, it has raised a lot of serious concern and valid concern. And so when it is taken to the National Assembly, you can expect that this is going to be a very robust debate on both sides, because both sides are saying this has raised serious concern.
So essentially, you're not in support of this huge margin of deviation, 25%, 30% in at least one instance.
I don't see how legally, because this matter is also before the courts, I don't see how legally this proposal can withstand the whole gist of the court process, because the court process took place, as I understand it, it's by a third party that took the matter to court. They're saying that the divisions are unequal and we need to make it more equal, meaning having the same or equal representation. And so if this particular proposal has such a large deviation, then how can it pass the court process? And how can it pass the National Assembly? Because it's not accomplishing that objective.
Well then, Minister, I want to ask you, looking at the redistricting exercise, how do you believe these constituencies should be divided and reshaped to be more equal?
I think you have to look at it, if I were sitting on the Elections and Boundaries Commission, and I'm not, if I were sitting there, you have to look at it that what is the average? So you divide 31 seats by, I think it would come up to 5,500 or 6,000. That would be about the equal. Yeah. And so to me, that has to at all times be at the center, at the forefront of your deliberations. If you are not accomplishing that, then you can't have a redistricting exercise successfully. And so I know that they're adding like Keycaulker to Fort George and all of that. Port Loyola is joining up with part of Collet, I think. But the numbers, at the end of the day, if you did all that, the numbers then have to reflect that you have accomplished your objective. If you haven't, then you need to go back to the drawing board. So to me, that is the number one concern. You can add divisions, you can consolidate them, you can have some absorbed, the smaller ones absorbed, that is all fine. But at the end of the day, the numbers, what are your numbers? If your numbers are not adding up, then you have to go back.
So that even applies to the Fort George Keycaulker situation, because there's also an argument there that it's across the Caribbean Sea and there's cultural dynamics that needs to be taken into consideration, even in terms of how people in Fort George, their way of life versus the way of life of individuals in Keycaulker.
That is absolutely a factor that has to be considered. But at the same time, we have to recognize that Belize Rural South was one of the largest divisions. Like Stan Creek West, it had close to 10,000 voters. And so something had to be done with Keycaulker and San Pedro. Whether it is that you divide San Pedro maybe from the middle of the island and do the southern portion of San Pedro with Keycaulker, that is an option. or consolidating Kikaker with a Belize city seat like Fort George or like Caribbean Shores, that is also a possibility. But all of these things at the end of the day have to consider, again, the numbers being the primary concern, and thereafter the secondary issues, meaning the way of life, the culture, that sort of thing. That also has to be taken into consideration.
Based on your understanding, what happens after it is debated in the House?
Well, I wouldn't want to preempt it, but I would think that if it is a proposal that is not supported by the opposition, and it's a proposal that's not supported by the government, then it has to be sent back to the Elections and Boundaries Commission, where they will have to engage in this exercise. I don't know if it's something that they have to start from scratch, but based on the deliberations and the debate coming out of the National Assembly, they will hear all the concerns, similar to what you're raising about Kikaker, similar to what I raised about having an equal number of representation, and they will have to take these factors into greater consideration to ensure that the objective is fulfilled.
Minister, whatever, we're moving off this topic a bit, whatever happened to body cams for police officers, are those still, or were they ever put to use? Are they in use at this current moment? Are there any sort of breakthroughs that have been made as a result of body cams?
I would say yes. Let us start with the fact that body cams have been in use since we introduced them over a year ago. And it has served as an excellent check and balance, particularly at checkpoints. Okay. If you notice when you're driving through a checkpoint, the police officers will have on their body cams. But it has also served as a check and balance on the specialized forces, so the GI3 and the SPU. And let me commend the GI3 even before body cams. There was a reduction in the number of cases reported of abuse by the GSU, now turned GI3. We're talking back in 2019, there were 19 cases of reported abuse by the GI3, but then the GSU. And in 2022, last year, there were 0 complaints made against the GI3. And this was, again, even before the introduction of body cams. But the body cam certainly helps as an additional check and balance, because if there's any instance of abuse against a specialized unit, you have the body cam to review and go back and say, let us confirm or deny what it is that this particular citizen is saying occurred on this particular day.
Have you guys documented any cases where the body cams came to great use in helping a case of someone accusing an officer?
Not in cases, like I said, it has resulted in an automatic check and balance because there are no issues, there are no reports made against these officers, but it has helped in criminal cases. In terms of pursuing suspects, identifying suspects, it has helped in that regard.
Okay.
I know that this is perhaps on a traffic perspective, but there is a proposal from Cabinet also to bring into law certain regulations against the use of cellular devices while driving, as well as the use of speed guns on the highways. You have any thoughts on that? Were you in those cabinet discussions?
No, I wasn't in that. Again, this was probably last week. I wasn't there last week, but those are excellent proposals if you ask me.
Yeah.
We see the increasing number of traffic fatalities happening all across Belize. That is something we have to address. And it's not necessarily a police department issue, but the highway patrol, which falls under the Ministry of Transport, equipping them with the necessary tools, because speeding is an issue. Drunk driving is perhaps the #1 issue that needs to be addressed. And certainly using your cellular phone, like you just mentioned, those are 3 factors that greatly contribute to a lot of the traffic accidents happening on our highways and even within our districts and towns. And so I think all of these things will greatly assist the transport department's attempt to have a reduction in the number of fatalities and traffic accidents.
Minister, finally, for me, Sab, I don't know if we've seen any improvements in the very controversial and talked about conviction rate here in Belize, since your administration has taken office. I believe that at that point it was 5%, I would imagine, and there were some debates about how you calculate that percentage. What is it looking like right now?
At the magistrates court level, we are above 60% conviction rate. These are for summary convictions, so these aren't your murder type cases. I find a lot of the issue that we have with murder cases is the willingness of witnesses to participate. Having said that though, I would certainly say that it is way above 3%. So even though back then it used to be 3%, I would say it's almost at 15% conviction rate for instances of serious crime like murder. And you just have to look back on your newscast over the last year. Yes, we do have a lot of nolle pros cases. Again, those are cases where witnesses at the end of the day, for whatever reason, they don't want to participate. But for the cases that actually go to trial, I think you would have seen that there is an increased number of convictions for those matters. So that percentage would have gone up, but that is something that I'll have to verify in terms of the statistics.
All right. Minister, thank you so much for stopping in and sharing with us the updates as it relates to firearm and ammunition control, of course, redistricting and everything else that you also provided to us. We appreciate the information and we look forward to having you here with us again in the future.
Thank you so much, Sabrina, and thank you, Paul.
No problem.
All right, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we will be joined by Smart to talk to us about their latest promotion. So don't go away.